You're not stuck in life, you're stuck in your head. The scariest part? You've been living in a prison with the door wide open, and the lock is nothing but your thoughts. Every worry, every replayed conversation, every imagined failure has held you captive, not the world around you. Stoicism teaches that it is not events that disturb us, but the judgments we place upon them. The walls you see, the fears that weigh on you, they were never real. They are words, habits, and stories you've been telling yourself. You carry the weight of yesterday and the uncertainty of tomorrow, leaving little room to breathe, to act, or to notice the life that is happening now. Step back from your thoughts, and you reclaim your attention, the most potent tool you have. Presence is not a gift. It is a practice, a choice. To observe without being controlled, to respond rather than react. Every return to what is real strengthens the mind's alignment with reality, virtue, and purpose. Notice how often your attention drifts to what never existed or what may never arrive. The mind thrives on complexity, on stories, on imagined threats, and in doing so, it steals energy from the only thing that matters, this moment. Anchoring yourself in what is, the breath, the body, the task at hand, is where freedom begins. Clarity emerges quietly, subtly, reshaping your relationship with every thought you experience. The doors were never locked, you only had to see them. You're standing in a room filled with a constant hum, but the hum is not around you. It's inside. It's the ceaseless commentary of your mind, narrating stories you didn't ask it to tell, predicting events that haven't yet arrived, embellishing every detail as though your imagination were the architect of reality itself. Thoughts rise like waves, each one crashing into the next, leaving traces of anxiety, doubt, or regret. You follow them, sometimes willingly, often unconsciously, as if every thought were a command rather than a suggestion. But pause for a moment and notice the machinery itself without trying to silence it. See how it spins, observe the gears turning, the connections forming, without feeling compelled to interfere. Your mind has a rhythm so familiar it masquerades as truth. Yet much of what we suffer is not the world itself, but the judgments we attach to it. Marcus Aurelius reflected, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." The power he speaks of is subtle, not about controlling every thought, but about choosing which ones shape experience and which you simply let pass. It is astonishing how persuasive the mind can be, convincing you that replaying the past or rehearsing the future is necessary, important, even protective. You argue with voices that do not exist, defend against scenarios that will never come, and measure yourself against standards no one set. Each thought promises a form of control, but delivers imprisonment. The habits of thought are so habitual that you rarely notice them, moving through life as though you are following a script someone else wrote. And yet, the very act of noticing, the pause between stimulus and response, is liberation. The space between thought and action is deceptively small, but it is profound. Freedom lies there. Epictetus reminds us, it's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. Observing thought, not as truth but as phenomenon, is the process of making the unconscious conscious. Each unobserved thought, each reaction unexamined, each habitual narrative that goes unchallenged, directs your life silently, invisibly, shaping perception without consent. The body becomes the doorway to presence. Every tension in your shoulders, every shallow breath, every quickened pulse is a signal you cannot ignore. The mind may argue that all is fine, but the body never lies. Focus here, on this moment, on sensation, on the simple act of breathing, feeling the ground beneath your feet. Stoicism emphasizes aligning with reality as it is, not how we imagine it. The mind thrives on distraction, complexity, and drama, but the present is quiet. And in that quiet, the mind cannot weave stories. It can only witness. Witnessing is your first act of freedom. Carl Jung once said, "Your vision will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakes." By returning attention to the body, to sensation, to what is immediate, the machinery of distraction begins to loosen its grip. Action, small and deliberate, becomes the antidote to mental captivity. Thinking alone is not mastery, it is rehearsal. Do the next obvious thing. Send the message, open the book, clean the corner of the room, write one paragraph. Each act grounds attention, strengthens discipline, and reminds the mind that it does not control reality. You do. Stoicism teaches that virtue is revealed in action, that wisdom is shown in what you choose to do rather than what you endlessly contemplate. And in these small victories, you find a rhythm that pulls you from the endless loops of thought into purposeful engagement with the world. Seneca observed, "We suffer more often in imagination than in reality." Each deliberate step affirms presence, proving that the mind is a tool, not a master. Presence in daily life magnifies clarity. Each conversation, each task, each moment of silence becomes an anchor. The world does not demand that you react to every provocation, yet your mind often insists you do. Observe how often imagined offenses or fears hijack your energy. By returning to the facts, what was said, what actually occurred, you begin to cultivate a calm that cannot be manipulated. Stoicism calls this living according to reason, separating impulse from truth, emotion from judgment. And with every return to presence, the stories that once dominated your mind shrink in influence, leaving room for clarity, patience, and real choice. Each deliberate observation of reality strengthens discernment, teaching the mind to respond rather than react. Emotional mastery arises not from suppression, but from engagement. Allow discomfort, grief, or fear to be present without labeling it permanent. Emotion is energy in motion. Thought gives it form and permanence. The Stoics remind us that feelings are neither good nor bad. They are neutral until we interpret them. When you breathe into the raw sensation, you release its hold. Anxiety diminishes not because the situation changes, but because your relationship to it does. You are no longer a prisoner of inner narratives. You are an active participant in your own experience. Carl Jung said, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." Each wave of emotion, fully observed, becomes a teacher rather than a tyrant, shaping clarity, courage, and presence. The final layer is integration, living with skill rather than reacting from habit. The mind will never be silent, but mastery is returning again and again, anchoring attention to breath, body, and action. Life is unpredictable. Peace does not come from controlling outcomes, but from controlling response. When you practice this daily, the world may remain unchanged, yet you experience freedom, calm, and presence in ways that feel transformative. The Stoics teach that the good life is built on what is within your control, your attention, your reasoned choice, your actions. By cultivating this, you stop living as a captive and start living as a user of your mind, fully awake, fully engaged, fully free. If the pursuit of clarity, presence, and mastery resonates with you, subscribing is not just following a channel, it is a commitment to return again and again to awareness, reason, and the deliberate cultivation of freedom. And there is a quiet satisfaction in this practice that cannot be overstated. It is subtle yet profound, the release of the compulsion to follow every story your mind tells, the easing of tension that comes from unneeded rumination, the emergence of presence where distraction once ruled. The mind, once the tyrant, becomes a tool, a servant to your conscious direction rather than a master of your experience. That retreat is accessible not through escape, but through the disciplined, compassionate observation of your own thoughts, moment by moment, breath by breath, intention by intention. When you practice this, the space between stimulus and reaction expands. It is in that expansion that choice resides. You begin to notice patterns, to see which thoughts enhance life and which deplete it, to observe impulses without allowing them to dictate behavior. The world remains the same, but your experience transforms because the lens through which you view it has been adjusted. Observing thought without obedience is not merely a mental exercise. It is the foundation for mastery over your inner life, the beginning of freedom, the first step in walking unshackled in a world that constantly seeks to distract and destabilize. And so, the very act of noticing, the simple, quiet, deliberate observation of your mind, is a revolution in itself, subtle, continuous, and profoundly transformative, one thought at a time. There is a profound clarity in attending to the body, a clarity that cannot be simulated or theorized. The mind, when untethered, races across past regrets and future anxieties, but sensation grounds you. It reminds you that you exist in a specific place, at a specific moment, that life is happening here and now, and that the mind's stories, while compelling, are separate from the experience itself. Carl Jung observed that your vision will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. Who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakes. Here, the awakening is tangible, the act of noticing the body, of returning attention to what is immediate and real, is the moment where the separation between self and story begins to dissolve. Sensation is not distraction, it is guidance, a reminder that presence is not a philosophical abstraction, but a lived experience, measurable in the rise and fall of breath, in the warmth of skin, in the subtle cadence of the heartbeat. Every gesture and motion contains within it a lesson, a truth that cannot be argued with or dismissed. The mind often devalues the wisdom of the body, dismissing subtle signals as irrelevant or inconvenient, but they are the compass pointing back to reality. The shallow breath before a stressful meeting, the tension in the jaw when a difficult thought surfaces, the unease in the gut before a conversation, these are all indicators that the mind has wandered from its proper task, observing and responding, not creating unnecessary narratives. To redirect attention to these signals is to train a skill of noticing that has far-reaching consequences. You begin to recognize when thought is productive and when it is mere speculation, when attention is enhancing life and when it is draining it. It is in the alignment of mind and body that the first real agency emerges. There is a rhythm to sensation, a cadence that, once acknowledged, reshapes perception. The world may still contain uncertainty, and circumstances may remain challenging, but when the body is engaged, the mind is less likely to lose itself in speculation or dramatization. Sensation becomes a mirror to reality, the rise and fall of breath, the pressure of the feet, the feeling of air on skin, each registering the immediate, undeniable moment. The Stoics emphasized that we should meet nature as it is, not as we wish it to be. Observing the body works in tandem with this principle. When attention is grounded in the tangible, the narratives of imagined injury or imagined misfortune lose their dominion. The body, honest and immediate, mediates between perception and reality, showing what is true and what is fabrication. When you focus on the body, witnessing becomes effortless. You do not need to interrogate every thought, to analyze every impulse, or to debate every fear. Attention naturally gravitates toward what is present, what is undeniable, what is immediate. Each breath is a signal, each heartbeat a reminder that life is happening here. The mind, which thrives on complexity and distraction, cannot manufacture its stories in this space. It can observe, but it cannot fabricate. In this quiet, there is clarity. The body's signals are simple, but they are profoundly instructive. They teach you that freedom is not obtained by silencing thought entirely, but by cultivating the capacity to witness, to notice without reacting, to align attention with reality rather than imagination. Even the smallest, most subtle bodily sensations can become exercises in awareness. The way your hands rest on your desk, the pressure of the chair beneath you, the tension in your shoulders, all of it is available for observation. Each return of attention to these points, each deliberate noticing of sensation, strengthens presence, sharpens awareness, and deepens the practice of self-governance. Reacting in this context does not mean responding to every thought. It means cultivating the habit of returning to what is real, using the body as a conduit to practice restraint, patience, and clarity. Over time, the mind learns that its wandering does not define you, and the stories it creates lose their binding power. The body, when observed, also anchors resilience. In moments of stress, when the mind begins its usual rehearsals of fear and failure, sensation can serve as a tether. Returning to the rise and fall of breath, the feel of feet against the ground, the natural rhythm of movement, provides stability when mental chaos threatens to destabilize. Seneca noted, "He is a wise man who does not grieve for the things which he has not, but rejoices for those which he has." The simple act of noticing what is already present in the body embodies this wisdom. Rather than chasing imagined deficits, you recognize reality and engage with it directly. The attention devoted to sensation, simple and disciplined, becomes a form of mastery, a way to reclaim the mind from its habitual distractions. Presence is not a passive state. It is an active discipline. Each return to bodily awareness requires effort, but the effort is subtle, almost imperceptible. It is not coercion but choice, repeated over and over until the alignment between mind and body becomes natural. Each moment spent returning attention to the body reinforces a habit of presence. Each observation strengthens the mind's capacity to witness rather than react, to participate rather than be swept along by narrative currents. This habitual anchoring of attention to sensation cultivates freedom, the freedom to engage with life as it is, not as imagined, and to act with clarity, courage, and intentionality. The body is, in essence, the first classroom for the mind. The wisdom it offers is immediate, unmistakable, and available at every moment. Every inhalation, every exhalation, every subtle pulse is a lesson in what is real, a reminder of where attention belongs, and a conduit to presence. By cultivating the ability to notice the body without distraction or judgment, you begin to reclaim your attention, your freedom, and your life. Witnessing sensation becomes a practice of liberation, an exercise in aligning thought with reality, and a doorway to clarity that nothing else can provide. It is here, in the simple act of observing what is, that true presence and true freedom emerges quietly but irrevocably, one sensation at a time. Recognition of mental patterns allows for another layer of insight. The habitual loops are not just abstract or emotional, they are predictive. They form a script that the mind expects to follow, a rhythm that the body often unconsciously supports. Tension accumulates before a conversation because the mind anticipates conflict. Self-doubt arises before a presentation because the mind has rehearsed inadequacy countless times. Catastrophic imaginings surge when the mind is idle, spinning scenarios with a precision that feels deliberate but is merely repetitive. Awareness of these loops is akin to finding a fault line before an earthquake. Once you see it, you can anticipate the shift and prepare, and sometimes you can divert its course entirely. The recognition that much of the tension we feel is generated internally is liberating. Patterns that once seemed inevitable can now be interrupted, redirected, or softened through mindful engagement. The challenge is not to eradicate thoughts, the mind will never cease producing them, but to engage with them differently. Each pattern is a thread, and you are no longer obliged to weave it into the fabric of your identity. You can acknowledge a thought without obeying it, consider a worry without letting it dictate action, reflect on a perceived slight without internalizing it as truth. This approach does not silence the mind, but it shifts the relationship from compulsive engagement to deliberate observation. The insight here is that the power is not in controlling circumstances or erasing patterns, but in exercising the choice to step out of the habitual story, to regard it as a phenomenon rather than a command. That step is the first act of freedom. Patterns are often reinforced by memory, the mind's archive of experiences it uses to validate expectation. A minor criticism is recalled as proof of inadequacy, a failed attempt as evidence of permanent limitation. Relationships, ambitions, and self-perception are filtered through this archive, and the mind then predicts future suffering based on a past selectively curated. This loop of anticipation and interpretation strengthens itself with repetition. The clarity that comes from observing patterns begins to break these loops. By seeing the predictive mechanism for what it is, a machine replaying old scripts, you begin to recognize when your mind is exaggerating or misrepresenting reality. By noticing the patterns without merging with them, you create an internal space where choice exists, where you are not compelled to follow habitual narratives blindly. The mind is naturally inclined to dramatize because drama captures attention, but this dramatization is often at odds with reality. The mind will magnify perceived threats, replay imagined offenses, and construct elaborate mental stories that feed anxiety. Awareness of patterns allows you to see these constructions for what they are: temporary, conditional, and ultimately optional. Presence becomes the tool to anchor attention in the midst of this noise. By returning attention repeatedly to the immediate, to what can be sensed and verified, the habitual loops lose their dominance. Each observation is a subtle act of training, a deliberate reallocation of attention away from narrative and toward reality. In doing so, the mind gradually recalibrates, learning that its stories are not mandates, but phenomena to witness, consider, and, when necessary, release. Breaking the habitual pull of thought does not mean denying its existence. It means cultivating a relationship with the mind where presence and attention, not impulse and reaction, govern experience. The patterns themselves are neither good nor bad. They are neutral until you respond. You begin to see that the story the mind tells is often a habit designed to maintain tension and control, not to enhance life. By stepping outside habitual judgment, by observing patterns without attachment, the grip of fear and limitation begins to loosen. Freedom emerges not from eliminating the narrative entirely, but from knowing when to step aside, when to witness, and when to let it pass. In doing so, you create the possibility of life lived with clarity, presence, and intentionality, liberated from the tyranny of compulsive thought loops. The small acts of engagement carry weight far beyond their apparent significance. They interrupt the default state of mental captivity. When you act, you remind yourself that the mind is not the master of reality. It is a tool. The body and will, the deliberate choices you make, are the instruments of change. Even the simplest actions generate a feedback loop. Effort produces clarity, clarity produces confidence, and confidence strengthens the capacity to act further. Every completed task, however minor, asserts agency and quiets the inner commentary that so often dominates your attention. The Stoics emphasized that wisdom is realized not in idle contemplation, but in disciplined action. The essence of virtue, in his perspective, is not theoretical, it is practical. Each conscious act aligns thought with reality, reinforcing patterns of agency rather than passivity. Repetition is central to mastery. The mind, left to its devices, prefers the familiar, even when familiar means anxious, distracted, or fearful. By inserting action into the flow of habit, you rewire the mental pattern. Each deliberate act, though small, is a signal to the mind that you are not bound to the habitual loop of worry or indecision. Epictetus reminded us, well-being is attained little by little, and nevertheless is no little thing. The implication is clear. Incremental acts of presence, attention, and engagement compound over time, producing profound transformation. The next obvious step, often overlooked because it seems trivial, is a decisive intervention against the tyranny of thought. It is not the scale of the action, but the decision to act at all, that sets the mind free. The mind naturally resists action because it prefers comfort and inertia. It will argue that conditions are insufficient, that preparation is incomplete, that the right time has not arrived. These rationalizations are the mind's strategy to maintain control, to continue the rehearsal rather than engage in the reality that might demand courage, adaptability, or discomfort. Action is inherently challenging because it introduces uncertainty, yet it is precisely this engagement with uncertainty that produces growth. Seneca observed, "Luck is what happens when preparation meets opportunity." In the framework of mental mastery, preparation is irrelevant unless it is paired with action. Each small step transforms potential into reality, intention into accomplishment, and thinking into living. By repeatedly acting in this deliberate, measured way, you cultivate resilience, discipline, and trust in your own capacity to navigate the world. The rhythm of repeated action begins to recalibrate perception. Thought no longer dominates the landscape of experience because each completed step confirms that agency exists outside of narrative. The mind notices that reality responds to action, and gradually the compulsion to endlessly replay scenarios diminishes. Anxiety is reduced not through logic alone, but through engagement. The act of sending the message alleviates the fear of inaction, opening space for clarity and focus. Each repeated act becomes a building block, a rhythm that transforms hesitation into momentum, passivity into intentional movement. There is a subtle interplay between attention and action. Mental captivity thrives when attention is scattered, when thought dominates and the mind fixates on all that could go wrong or all that is imagined. Action, by contrast, anchors attention. Even a single deliberate act, the brush of your hand across a surface, the mark of a pen on paper, the tap of a key, grounds awareness in the tangible. It draws the mind from abstraction into reality. In practice, this means engaging fully with the immediate task, allowing attention and effort to converge, dissolving the power of mental distraction. The repeated act of returning to what is immediate, real, and actionable is a profound exercise in freedom. Each small action serves as evidence against the tyranny of idle thought. The mind, previously accustomed to rehearsing endlessly, begins to learn a different rhythm. Tasks that once seemed monumental are now approached in increments, breaking the illusion of overwhelming complexity. This approach reinforces the understanding that mastery is built not in the mind alone, but in the relationship between mind and action. Sensation, decision, and execution form a cycle where thought informs action, action clarifies thought, and presence strengthens both. The Stoics maintained that virtue is not passive, it is exercised. Each step you take in alignment with intention confirms agency, strengthens attention, and teaches the mind that it is not the sole arbiter of reality. The cumulative effect of small, deliberate action extends beyond individual tasks. Life itself begins to feel less fragmented and more coherent. Anxiety, previously fueled by imagined scenarios and internal narratives, diminishes because the habit of acting interrupts habitual loops. Presence expands as attention is anchored in repeated engagement with reality. Epictetus summarized this principle, saying, "Don't explain your philosophy, embody it. To act is to embody awareness, intention, and mastery. Each act, however minor, confirms your capacity to participate fully in life, to reclaim freedom from the internal compulsions that have dominated thought for so long." Action, in this way, becomes not just a remedy for mental captivity, but a practice in the cultivation of character, discipline, and self-governance. Over time, these small victories accumulate into a transformative rhythm. Mental captivity loosens its grip as the mind learns that its compulsions are optional, that its stories do not dictate reality, and that deliberate engagement produces clarity and power. The repeated act of doing the next obvious thing trains attention, fortifies will, and builds trust in one's own capacity.